Hello and welcome to Your Choice 2025 special election coverage on HOMTV. I'm your host, Danneisha McDole. On the August 5th special election ballot, Meridian Township voters will be asked to consider two millages for a proposed community and senior center. The interview we're filming today is intended solely for informational purposes and aims to provide residents with factual information regarding the proposed center. The proposed community and senior center will be approximately 40,000 square foot facility constructed between the township's central fire station and the Okemos U.S. post office along Central Park Drive. The proposed millages include a construction bond proposal at 0.5576 mil and an operating millage at 0.3475 mil. If passed, the total millage rate increase would be 0.9051 mil. Today, we're joined by Meridian Township Manager Tim Dempsey to learn more about these millages. Tim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. I'll start off with the first question. What is the proposed Meridian Township Community and Senior Center, and what will it offer?
So as its name indicates, it's a combined center. So it'll include, of course, the community center portion, which primarily will be a gymnasium that will offer different opportunities for sports like volleyball, basketball, and other similar activities. You'll also have the ability to potentially rent that gymnasium out. There'll also be a community room that should accommodate well over 100 people. So that'll be available for different events if people want to utilize that and rent it for things like weddings, banquets, and other activities. We could potentially see a lot of different groups in the community utilizing that, like nonprofits and other community groups. And then the other half of the building will be the senior center. So the senior center will offer many of the things that are in the current center, and then some additional things. We'll have a dedicated wellness room. We'll have an exercise room for seniors. We'll also have a lounge area for different activities, a library, and a warming kitchen too. So they could bring in meals to the facility as well. So between the community and the senior center portion, really a lot of different spaces that can be utilized by our larger community and by our seniors.
Thank you. Now, why is the community and senior center being proposed now?
So the current senior center is located at Chippewa Middle School. So it's part of the Okemos Public School District facility. That building is scheduled for demolition. So the senior center would now no longer have a location to operate in. So because of that upcoming change, it necessitated the need to really look at, okay, what are the other options that might be available for the senior center?
Now, who came up with the proposal and how was it developed?
It's actually been a multi-year process to develop this proposal. It really goes back to 2022 when the township realized that, hey, the Okemos Public Schools, they have this plan for demolition of Chippewa. We need to start thinking about what we're going to do. So the township formed a work group with some of the township board and staff to start to look at and analyze this issue. Parallel to that, the township board at the end of 2022 also established a board goal for 2023 to evaluate a new senior center. And then over time that evolved. So back in 2024, a formal task force was actually formed by the township, and they started work in September of 24, and that continued through March of this year. So they met over that time frame to evaluate all the different options for a senior center and a community center, and looking at the combination of those two items, and then the different options in terms of cost, space allocation, as well as different locations throughout the township. So it was a fairly lengthy process that the township has utilized to look at the options available.
Thank you. Now, where would this center be located, and did the township consider any additional locations?
Yeah, so the center would be located between the Okemos post office and the central fire station along Central Park Drive, just east of Okemos Road. That's available land that the township had acquired quite a few years ago for community type buildings. Obviously, the Central Fire Station, which was constructed almost 10 years ago now, was the first building put there, but there is available land. The task force did look at other sites. In fact, they looked at around 10 different sites around the township. And one of the primary ones that emerged out of that was actually the former Yonkers space at the Meridian Mall. The challenge there was that the proposed center we're looking at is about 40,000 square feet. That was as large as 92,000 square feet. So it had a lot more cost involved with such a large facility. The other challenges with sites around the township were most of them would have required acquisition. We already own the land on Central Park Drive, so to have to buy another property would have cost probably several $1,000,000. Or in the case of leasing property, we had a challenge with how long we would actually be able to do that and still be able to utilize our grant that we have from the state of Michigan.
Now, how will this center be funded?
So the center will be funded primarily through two sources. The first one is a $5 million grant that we received from the state of Michigan, and that would be for construction of the facility. And then we would fund the rest of it, both the construction and the operations, through a potential millage vote of the township. So on August 5th, voters will have the option to choose whether or not to support the center operationally and through construction. The construction bond is separate from the operational millage, but that would be the funding mechanisms that we'd be utilizing here. Again, should voters decide to support that.
Now, how much would the project cost to build and how much would it cost to operate?
Yeah. So construction of the overall facility is $24 million. As I mentioned earlier, we have $5 million state grant. So the township would be responsible for $19 million. So that's where the bond millage would come into play to cover that cost. And then the other side of it is the operation. So we've done an estimate, and operationally it'll be about $1.1 million per year to operate the facility. So that's everything, including all the additional staff for programming. That includes maintenance and operation of the facility, and then being able to reinvest in any needed building upgrades that are required over time with any building. So those are the primary cost factors.
Now, how much will residents be expected to pay per year if these millages pass?
When we look at how much a resident would pay, one of the things that we've done is we've looked at, for instance, the average taxable value of a single family detached home. In Meridian Township, that's about $152,000, or a market value of about $304,000 is what that equates to. On an annual basis, that would roughly be around $138 per year per that house. So over the duration of the bond millage and the operating millage, that would be the total combined cost at $138 per year.
If these millages pass, when will they start and how long will that last?
Yeah, so if the voters do decide to approve these millages, they would start on the December tax bill of this year, so December of 2025. And they would vary in terms of their length, depending on what happens when the operating millage expires. So the bond millage would be a 20-year time frame, and then the operating millage is in a 10-year time frame unless it gets renewed at the expiration of that point.
Could the debt and operating millages ever be reduced?
Yes, the operating and the debt millages could be reduced. So for the debt millage, the scenario it would be reduced would be if the projected taxable value for the township would exceed our estimates. So what we did is we used a 1% per year assumption on taxable value increase to determine how long and how much that bond would be necessary to implement the project. So if that rate of growth exceeds 1%, it would be shorter. And then on the operational side, it's set for 10 years. But then at that point, the township would have to decide whether or not they would want to extend the millage for another 10 years or look at another way to pay for operations.
Now, what would happen if one millage is passed and the other fails?
So the millages are tie-barred together, meaning that if one passes and one fails, neither can move forward. And it doesn't matter which one would be the one that passes or the one that fails. They would both be negated because of the way they're tie-barred together.
Now, if the proposal for a new senior and community center fails, would the township be able to still replace the existing senior center?
The hope is yes, that we would be able to replace the existing senior center. The thing that we'll have to do is move quickly to determine, okay, what would that senior center only look like in terms of size and scope, and then determining, does it remain on the proposed site, and being able to identify the additional funding for that. So we could still utilize the $5 million state grant, assuming we can meet timelines, and then we'd have to come up with the differential, which is around $4.8 million. So the senior only would be around $9.8 million. So if we can figure out the funding and assume the location remains the same, the idea would be that we'd still move that project forward.
When would the new center be open if the funding is approved?
Yeah. If voters approve the funding, the process will begin immediately in terms of trying to finalize design, get the project out to bid, and then start construction at some point early in 2026. The likely opening under that schedule would be probably sometime in early 2028.
Now, how will operations be funded after the 10-year operating bond expires?
Yeah, so after the 10-year operating bond expires, the township would have to decide to fund operations one of two ways. They could either go back to the voters and ask for a renewal of that operating bond, or they could look at the current township budget at the time and decide whether or not they just want to pay for it out of other existing revenue. Part of the equation at that point is that the township will likely have a much better picture about operating revenue, because the current assumption is that revenue is really an unknown at this point because of not wanting to assume too much in terms of how we would charge residents for the use of the facility, and then how we would be able to, project that revenue over time.
We've reached the end, and the last question is there anything else you would like to say regarding these millages?
I would just encourage all of our residents to go to our website to look at the additional information. We have a very extensive frequently asked questions. It touches on all the questions that we discussed here today, and then there's additional ones. And we're continuing to add to those as we get questions from residents. So if people who are watching this go to the FAQ and they see something that maybe isn't answered, they can submit that question to the township, and we'll certainly evaluate that and try to put that onto our FAQ as well. So just encourage people to learn as much as they can and be educated voters in this process.
And that wraps up our interview. Thank you so much, Tim, for joining us and providing us some additional information for this upcoming millages.
You're welcome, and it was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And thank you for watching Your Choice 2025 special election coverage with Township Manager Tim Dempsey about the August 5th special election ballot questions, which asks voters to consider the Meridian Township Community and Senior Center operating millage and project bond. For an FAQ document, financial information, concept plans, and other information, visit meridian.mi.us/center. I'm your host, Danneisha McDole, and thank you for watching.